Director of the Career Center here at UNC Pembroke. And today we're going to do a resume writing workshop. It's going to be pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to go through some points and some tips that maybe you hadn't thought about, or ways to kind of make your marketing documents, because this is a business group. It makes perfect sense that you would want to market your skills, and that's what we're doing with your resume. So we'll get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them during the presentation. It won't bother me. It doesn't throw me off. I'm used to that. So please feel free to jump in. All right. So I'm not going to read this to you, but we'll talk through these, so that'll be good. So there are several points that you'll want to consider when you're writing your resume, and we'll kind of go through this. Your target audience, the type of position for which you're applying, and the expectations of the potential employer. Now, by the target audience, most people will understand that's the business that you're actually applying for and that HR manager. And I always get a question, well, how do I know what they're looking for and what they're asking me to do? Well, that's going to be in your position description. So when you get that job description that you're applying for, or you're even talking to somebody, because a lot of jobs, are networked into. So if you're talking to somebody and they're like, hey, you know what, you'd be a great fit for this job, you need to ask some questions so that you can tailor your documents to that position. And then the expectations of the potential employer. Again, they outline that pretty well in their job description because they want you to see what they're looking for so that you can match your skills to that and tell them why you're a good fit for the company. Okay. So most resumes have different categories, obviously. The first one and most important one for the first step is your identification. We're going to talk about this objective statement or summary of skills. Both of those are optional, so don't feel like if you don't have either one of those, you have a terrible resume. There are multiple ways to do a resume, so a lot of it is based on your personal choice and preferences, and we'll get to that. Your education, of course, is important. You're here. You need to have that on there. You need it to be prominent. Your experience. Again, you'll notice I didn't say job experience or work experience, but experience, because we can capture a lot under that heading, and we can give some importance to some things that maybe you hadn't thought about giving importance to. Some resumes will also have additional categories. By that, I mean you can have things like your military experience if you have that. Relevant coursework. That may be really important to someone who is in a field or going into a field and they don't have a lot of experience that is work related. Well, while you're in school, you'll have projects, you'll have things that you're doing that will directly relate to what you're trying to go into. That's why you pick a major, so that you can kind of tailor your pathway again towards that. So we'll talk about relevant coursework. Any languages that you speak. So if you are fluent in another language or you have skills in another language, highly important to put that on there. So it makes you more marketable. Activities we'll talk about, that's optional. Certifications would be great. So if you're in school and gaining certifications while you're in the process of finishing a program, put those on there. Any professional memberships can go on there. Professional publications usually show up on a curriculum vitae, but you can also have that as a category on your resume. So we'll talk about the differences between the vitae and the professional and the resume just a little bit. We'll talk about that, but we won't dwell on it. Honors and awards and licenses. Now, for some of the people who are working on their resumes, a lot of this you won't need because you have additional experiences or things that you'll need to cover in the maximum 2 pages that you have to work with. So don't feel obligated to have all of this, but if you do have it and you can put it on your 2 pages without compromising the important stuff on your resume, you'll put that on there. All right, so let's go through this. Again, this is kind of basic, but you want to think about this. So of course, you want your name prominently displayed. You'll notice it's larger than the rest of this. Again, you can adjust how this looks, but you want it to be consistent. So, you want your current address, If you're at school and you have a permanent home address that's different from that, you can list both of them if you have the space. But you want them to be able to contact you. You want an employer to be able to contact you, and you want to give them multiple ways to do that. Because if you just had your email address, your email crashes, they invite you for an interview, you don't know, it doesn't look bad on the employer, it looks bad on you. So give them multiple ways to contact you. That's what the purpose of this is, of course. So I tell people all the time, be careful about this phone number and that email address. Make sure the email address is professional. It's great to get either one of the free services like Outlook or Gmail that you dedicate just to job search. That way you have a dedicated email address that you use all the time, that you're consistently checking when you're applying for positions. It just makes sense to keep all that separate. And the phone number, which most people don't think about, but if you still have a home phone number, which a lot of us don't, but if you still have a home phone number, you want to make sure that whoever's answering that phone is going to answer it in a manner that does not get you kicked out of the search immediately. Your kids answering and asking a bunch of questions, or your mom accidentally hanging up on somebody. You don't want that. So try to make sure that's your cell phone or a number where you're going to be the one answering the phone. Back to the cell phone, make sure that if you have a ringback tone or anything unprofessional on your, take that off. Take that off. Little Wayne will not get you a job. He will probably get you taken out of the search. So, or R. Kelly ringback is scary to most employers. So we don't want that to be the representation of you. So make sure that number is something that you have control over. And change that voicemail. Make it very plain. Mm-hmm. Your name, contact me. That kind of information. Okay? So we talked about this objective statement. And I talked about how you don't have to have one. Well, you don't. But if you're going to have one, it needs to be very, very specific to the job that you're actually applying for. Most people will have this second objective, to obtain a teaching position to use my degree to further my career. That's fine. We know you're applying for the job and you want a job. That's your objective. We know that. What you should do with that space, if you're going to use it, is to make sure it's as detailed as possible to the specific job and the specific company that you're applying for, and you give them something that tells them why they should hire you. If you're going to use this much real estate on your page, it needs to count for something. So telling them what you want from the job doesn't help an employer. An employer wants to know what you bring to the table that will help them. So talking about how you want to use your degree doesn't help them. Telling them why your internship matched up with the position that they're hiring for and making it easy for a hiring manager to see that, that's good use of the space. Now, I personally don't have an objective statement on my resume, and there's a reason for that. Again, usually because it's vague, and because I think a better use of the space would be a summary of skills. Because again, remember we talked about that job description a minute ago. The job description is your key to how you figure out what the employer wants. And I like to print off a copy of my resume and a copy of the job description. And I sit them side by side and I highlight the skills that I have that they're looking for. Because they're telling me what they want. I just have to tell them that I have it. So that's what I'm using that space for. So you can do it either way. I do caution that if you use a paragraph format, you do run the risk of an employer having 5 to 7 seconds to look at your document and not reading through this. So that's why I personally like the bullet point format, because you want them to be able to get through it quickly. They're going to scan it first, visually scan it if an applicant tracking system isn't the one scanning it. And we'll talk about that too, because that's a great way for you to capture some of that information too. But if they're actually physically reading this, they're not going to have a lot of time, and they may have 100 applications for one position. They're not going to take a whole lot of time to read through all of this information if it's not kind of in bite-sized chunks. So just think about that. So the other thing I talked about, when you have this summary of skills and you're going to put those bullet points in there, if your documents are being scanned by a computer before anyone looks at it, which is the applicant tracking system, having keywords from that job description will help you to get through their system. No one knows exactly what those systems are looking for, but a good rule of thumb is to use keywords from the job application, from the job description, and put them in that summary of skills. Because if the only thing they're scanning for is certain words, you want that certain word to appear. So that's a good way for you to capture that information. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So on to your education section. Again, I talked about a minute ago how there's no one way to write a resume. I do tell students that in a lot of cases, having your education at the top, especially if you don't have a wealth of experience in the field, is a good way to go. Optional. It is not a requirement that you have your education at the top, especially if you have some experiences that are really directly related to the field you want to go into. Like if you're in a business field and you have internships or other things that are really directly related to the field, then you can put your education below that. Or if you have professional experience and you're coming back into the workforce, that would be a good way for you to have your education somewhere else on the page. But for most students who don't have a wealth of experience, they'll start with their education. And the reason for that is because when you're, again, looking at that job description, the qualifications usually listed in order of importance to that employer. The first thing you'll see on most of them is what the educational requirement is. Again, why make it hard for them to find it? If that's the first thing they're going to look for, you make it the first thing that they see. Again, exceptions are if you have experience or other things that you want to talk about more importantly, that's fine. It's not a hard and fast rule. So there are two different ways that I've outlined here that you could do your education, that you could present it. I always tell students, I get this a lot. They'll start with their start date for when I started school. I started school in 2007. I'm still here. I'm projected to graduate in 2017. You don't want to tell an employer that. Or if you've been to multiple schools and you don't have any degrees from any of them, you don't need to capture that information. Unless there's something that is going to benefit you and tell an employer that you're a good fit for the position, you don't need to have a lot of that. We just talked a little bit before the presentation about having high school on there. For someone who is a freshman or a sophomore, it's fine to have your high school information on there because you may not have involvement on campus yet. You may not have leadership roles. You may not be involved in a bunch of stuff yet on campus that's directly related to your field. But by the time you're a junior or a senior, you should have things here at Pembroke that will take up that space that you would need for your high school. So you need that space for all the wonderful things you're doing on campus. One obvious exception, again, is if you have experience that is directly related. So say, for instance, you were from a different country and you had to choose your major in high school and you were in a program that was directly related to your major. You may still want to leave that on there. You don't have to, but it may be something that, again, gives you a talking point when you get into the interview. Because the point of this document is to get your foot in the door somewhere so that you can talk about how amazing you are and how you're a great fit for this position. So thinking of it that way, what's going to benefit you and the company. Okay. GPA. The GPA is 3.0 and above, then you could put it on there. If it's anything below that, it doesn't speak highly of your GPA. And they'll wonder, especially if the only thing you have on there is that you're in school, they'll wonder why your GPA is so low if you're not doing anything but school. So don't give them the opportunity to think about that. So anything 3.0 and above, you can put it on there. Again, it's optional. You don't have to have it on there, but some companies will ask for your GPA. I know offhand, If you're in the management programs for enterprise leasing, they ask for your GPA for some reason. But they're trying to get the cream of the crop, and that's one way they determine who's the cream of the crop. Fair or not, that's what they do. So, just look at the job description, the application materials, and see if they ask for that. So if they do, please add it. Now, if they don't, and it's not where it needs to be, please don't add it. Okay. So on to our experience section, which is probably where most of you will spend the bulk of your time working on your documents. So what I want you to think about is how your experience will translate to someone who is in a different area. So this young lady, I think she actually was an education major. So working at a child care center or a daycare would probably be directly related to her field. But if her degree was in business and she didn't want anything to do with education and she worked at Tammy's Child Care, she would need to talk to the employer in a way that helps them understand why, even though you worked at Tammy's daycare, it still has relevance to my company. So I handed out some transferable skills worksheets, and if you're viewing this online, I will post it to the website so that you have access to it. The transferable skills worksheet is important because it helps students think about the positions that they've held in terms of how this relates to another field. So, for example, Tammy's Child Care, again, if she's an education major, great. But if she's not, she wants to talk about what she brings to the table that would benefit another company. So maybe she'll talk about some of the communication skills that she gained from working at the daycare center, because every job description has something about communication skills on it. Regardless of the position, it has something with communication skills on there. She has interpersonal skills from working as part of a team. She has skills, she may even have financial skills from working in a daycare. If she's taking the money and giving receipts, people don't think of those things in terms of what they did that makes them marketable outside of that other position. What you see is a job description. So they'll say stuff like, I helped change diapers, or I cleaned the bathrooms, or I gave change, but they are not thinking of it in terms of how that looks to an employer. What did you do that can translate? So those transferable skills worksheets will help you kind of think of those jobs in terms of what you did. The other thing is, you'll notice that there are this starts with an action word. You want a company to see that you are action oriented. You're not there breathing up the air, taking up space every day and running out the door at 5 o'clock. You have things that you're doing, and you want them to see that you're about action and about doing things. So start each one with an action word. Again, I gave you good words to use on a resume. Those are all action words. You can start a sentence with those. Start your phrases, rather, with those. They will be posted to the website as well. What you don't want to do is have a whole page of managed, directed, directed, managed. Switch it up. We get tired of reading the same thing over and over again. And what tends to happen is that you will have those action words in the front, the same action word, and they won't even finish reading it because they'll start to think, oh, she's doing the same thing over and over again. She didn't have diversified skills, or he doesn't. So the reason why this description, organized daily activities for 25 students, ensuring an enriching environment for learning, was maintained, she adds numbers in there. So she talks about the number of students she served. She gave a number of different action words. She's doing things. Okay. Now, there is one typo, and I did this on purpose. I always see this. It's the tense of that first verb, right? It says organized, but she's currently doing this job. So people will miss that when they're writing their resume because they know what it's supposed to say. Have somebody else read your resume, because again, something that simple could be the thing that tells a hiring manager that you don't have attention to detail. just the little stuff. And you don't know what that thing is that the hiring manager says, okay, this is my pile I'm going to keep. And this is my pile that's I'll come back to it later. They never get to that come back to it later pile. So I did leave that in there on purpose, and rarely does anybody catch it. But you want to make sure that you're using the right verb tense. If you're presently in the job, it should be present tense. And if you're, this is a job in the past, make sure it's in the past. Okay. All right. So another experience. I get a lot of students who come in and say, oh, I don't have any experience. I just worked at Subway, or I just worked at Burger King. Burger King, Subway, McDonald's, anything where you're public facing, you have skills. If you don't jump across the counter every Saturday and just want to take the life out of everybody, that's a skill, okay? Now, we would reword that. We would change that to your interpersonal skills and your listening skills and your communications. But the point is that there are skills that you gain from working as a part of a team. There are skills that, again, we talked about that monetary. If you're working at Burger King on a Saturday at 1 o'clock or noon, you have to keep that going pretty fast. You have to listen to what the customer's asking for. You have to deliver what they're asking for. You have to handle money. You have to keep the environment around you clean. All of those are skills. And we would work to rework that so that it actually comes off as, again, those transferable skills and not a job description. But this person wrote, provided exceptional customer service daily to 100 guests, ensuring that customer needs were met. What's wrong with this one? Anybody?
Provided.
Excellent. Again, attention to detail. So, yeah, but she is providing a service on a daily basis, and she's 100 guests a day. That's pretty daunting for somebody who's working at Subway, because you're doing a lot. Yes, sir.
Would you want to say approximately or something like that?
You could, yeah, because you're not
you
actually counting them every day.
Number, right.
And some days it could be 300 customers, or some days it's 10. But you can always say approximately, yes, that would
averaging or something like
average.
that. Okay.
Absolutely, because you want it to be accurate. You don't want it to feel like you're just throwing numbers out there for the sake of throwing a number out there. So yes, thank you. Absolutely. All right. So here's another thing that a lot of students will need to do is talk about their relevant skills. Again, you may not have experience in the business world yet because you're a student, you came out of high school, you went straight to school, whatever. You may not have a whole lot of experience that is directly related to the employer, that the employer will see as directly related. So it's your job to tell them why you have skills that they need. Relevant skills is an excellent way to capture that. So if you have room and you want to do a relevant skills section, you can talk about what you're doing here at school, volunteer work, any of that. You can pull skills that the employer is looking for and give them bullets so that the employer, again, it's easy for them to see why you're a good fit. Hello there.
How you doing?
How are you?
Not bad.
Okay. Oh,
I was just. Have you seen Terror already? Well, I'm not going to disturb you. But I'm sorry. I just
that's
need
okay. It happens.
that one.
Uh-huh.
Give him hell and all the wrong information that you can.
Excellent. We'll do.
No, I'm just playing.
All right.
Look at him, Bill.
So, with the relevant skills, you can pull those. Everybody's looking for a leader. Even if you're going to be in an entry-level position, they want people who will eventually be able to take over leadership and show that kind of skill set. So we'll want to make sure that if you have leadership experience or that you are doing leadership, even if you got that leadership from being in school and heading up group projects, if you were the leader on multiple group projects, that's still a skill. Keeping people on task is hard work. And then actually presenting something that is worthy of being presented after you work with a group, that's a skill set. Talk about it. Again, you may not have a wealth of other experiences, so this is a way for you to capture that. Okay? Trained in de-escalation of extreme behaviors, that's another one that if you actually have that, please put that on there, because every employer is looking for somebody who can take it down a notch. Because there's always somebody that's nutsy bobo that comes in and you have to bring them down. Not here at Pembroke. We're all perfect here, but other places. So we talked about those additional categories. I talked about here, if your information is important, don't hide it at the bottom of your resume. Again, you may only have 5 to 7 seconds to capture their attention. And if this is where the bulk of your qualifications are going to come from, you need to move it up on the page a little bit. So this person is a member of the National Teachers Association. Again, she was an education major, so that sounds great. You know, that's something that's relevant to her. She's a member of the Florida Teachers Association. Again, that's right up her alley. Maybe she's from Florida, so she joined there during a student membership. I want to tap on that really quickly. Professional memberships. If you're a student, a lot of organizations offer student rates that are cheaper than if you were a full professional who've been in the field a while. The other thing is they'll offer like SHRM offers, that's the HR thing. They offer both a student discount and a young professional. So if you're out in the field for less than a year, you can join SHRM with a professional membership that's a lower rate because they know that you're not making the kind of money that you're gonna, well, you may, but you know, chances are you're gonna have to build up to that. So they want to offer you the opportunity to join these big organizations, do some networking, get some professional experience through that, and then when you are making the big bucks, you can join at full price. So take advantage of that. There are plenty of business associations that you might want to do. Now, this is kind of a small print kind of resume example, but the basics are the same. We talked about she chose to use her education here at the top because, again, that's where the bulk of her experience is going to come from. She has these different experiences listed out, and she has her community involvement. That was another heading she chose to use, and her professional memberships. What I want you to get from this is how consistent that is. So she has her Pembroke over here. She has her dates that she was there. Same thing with her experience. She has Pembroke here and her dates. Pembroke here, dates. All of that's consistent. The name of the company is at the top of each one of these. And then her role in that company is below it. You can choose how you want to do this, but whatever you do, make it consistent. The other thing you'll notice is that she doesn't have a bunch of different fonts on here or colors or anything like that. If you're going into a professional field, you don't need all that stuff. You need the information captured. And most of the hiring managers are still older, more conservative people working those type of positions. So they don't want to see all that flash in the pan stuff. They want to be able to get to the information quickly. So they want to see it in this kind of format. It doesn't have to look like this exactly, but pick a font. Use capitalization, or I wouldn't do a whole lot of italics because, again, if you're in that applicant tracking system, sometimes they can't read all those fancy fonts with the tails hanging off or italicized. You don't want to do anything that's going to get you kicked out of the system prematurely.
What about font size?
Font size is between a 10 at the very smallest, 10 is the smallest you can go, to about a 12. Most people fall somewhere in the middle, about 11. And if you're looking at an 11, if you have everything capitalized, even if everything on the page is, the same size font, but say your headings are an 11 and you do them all in caps or all in caps and bold, they'll look like a heading as opposed to blending in with the rest of it.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be any larger. So there are some tricks to kind of getting it down. Always get asked 1 page or 2 maximum. What I don't want to see is 1 page of really good information and a line or 2 on the other page, or another page of stuff that really doesn't matter at all, or stuff that looks like filler. So if you can get 2 full pages, great. If you can get 2 3/4, great. 2 1/2, no. We need to work on consolidating or changing some things around, or maybe talking about some of those volunteer experiences or classroom experiences, that kind of stuff. Okay? Any questions so far? No? Okay, so to close, remember your audience, and you'll find that information, in the job description and all the stuff. Highlight your transferable skills, which we talked about. Consider additional relevant categories if you need them. And invest in resume paper. I say that because when you're going into the interview, you don't have to do, most of these jobs now are posted online, so you won't need the resume paper if you're just doing it online. But if you are fortunate enough to get an interview, you want to take copies, hard copies of your resume, 2 or 3. You don't know who's going to interview you. Even if they tell you it's one person, you could walk in, it'd be a panel. So invest in a few sheets of resume paper. Don't get the big box. You won't remember where it is the next time you apply for a job anyway, and that stuff can be expensive. So get a few pages or go in with somebody to split a box, that kind of thing, because it can be expensive. But you don't need 45 sheets of it, hopefully. If you need 45 sheets, you need to come see me because something is wrong if you have to send in 45 resumes. So your resume is an important aspect of gaining the interview. Again, it's all about marketing yourself. You want this document to speak for you until you can speak for yourself. That's the point. Okay? Thank you for attending. And I think I have questions on here again, but I think we've covered that. So thank you for your attention. I hope you actually got something from it. So excellent. We can cut the, okay.